Hello everyone, welcome to AWS Tutorials. In AWS Tutorials, we provide workshop and exercises to learn about AWS services. These workshop and exercises are published to our website aws-dojo.com. Today, we are going to talk about data migration service, and in this case, we'll talk about certain use cases where you migrate data from your relational database to S3 bucket. So we'll talk about in what use cases you will do that. And of course, since it is AWS Dojo, you will have one exercise towards the end to implement a scenario end to end to get a feeling about how it works. So let's get started. Just to give you a small introduction about data migration service, it is a service which is primarily used for migrating data from one source to another, from source to destination. And your source destination both could be heterogeneous or both could be homogeneous. So for instance, if you are moving data from MySQL to MySQL, then it is a homogeneous migration. But if you are, say, migrating from MySQL to Postgres or Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres or vice versa, or you are migrating from, say, relational database to S3 bucket, then in those cases, it is a case of heterogeneous migration. And it supports both homogeneous and heterogeneous migration. Data migration service also supports full and incremental migration. But in order to have incremental migration, your source system should support CDCs, the change data set. So as long as the source systems, the source environment supports change data set, your data migration service can handle incremental migration as well. So just to get some more idea about how data migration service works, so that then you understand at least the fundamental of it. So in order, so there are certain components which work together to make your data migration service work. So first component is your replication server. And this is an EC2 instance which you launch. It is a managed EC2 instance. And this instance works as a compute instance, which is primarily responsible for migrating data from your source to the destination. Now, in order to connect to the source, you configure source endpoint. So you can create multiple source endpoint, and you can say, no, your source endpoint could be, as I said, your databases or S3 bucket, and you provide, of course, the connection information, the credential information in order to connect to your endpoint. Similar to source endpoint, you can also configure your target endpoint, and target endpoints are responsible for providing connection information to the target. Okay, so these three are the most fundamental thing you need to have a place before you can start the migration. A replication server, which is basically the compute power, the virtual machine, the EC2 instance, which is doing the actual migration, which is running the migration, your source endpoint, which is providing connection to your source systems, your target endpoints, which are providing connection to your target systems. And then you start writing migration tasks. So in each migration task, you have to tell which replication server you want to use, source endpoint you want to use, what destination or target endpoint you want to use, and then you also provide additional information depending on the source or target, like how do you want to select your source data, any type of filter you want to do, and also you also provide certain more configuration from the target endpoint point of view. But in migration tasks, basically you configure that what source endpoint you want to use, what target endpoint you want to use, on which replication server you want to run this migration task, and then you provide some additional information in terms of location of the target and also the filtering criteria on the source, and then you simply run this migration. Now this migration can be run either on demand, or you can run also as a scheduled migration. Okay, so that's how your data migration service work. So moving on, there are two use cases when you want to move data from a relational database service or any kind of, I'm saying RDS here, but I'll say any kind of database service to S3. The first use case is when you want to database migration. Many times what happens, guys, is that you have a source database and you don't want to copy everything. I mean, like, okay, let's take other way. So you have a source database, you have records over there, but those records need some kind of cleaning. Yeah. And in that case, but you don't want to touch your source database because that's a production running database. So you don't want to do cleansing on the source database, but you want to do cleansing intermediate somewhere so that before it goes to the target, the data is properly cleansed. And in that case, you can go for this two-step migration, where in the first step you simply migrate from your source database to the S3 bucket, and then in S3 bucket, you can then perform your cleansing operation. You can use, in fact, using select S3 select query, or you can use Athena-based query to look at your data, to remove certain files from there, certain records from there, and then you clean up your data, and then at step 2, then you copy from your S3 to target database. And this both step 1 and step 2 can be performed using data migration service. So this is one approach. And you might say, why AWS tutorial, I cannot use a relational database here? Well, you can use it, but then the cost will be higher. And in case of S3, you can simply upload your file to S3, clean up the data over there, and once, in fact, you can write some kind of Python job or Glue job to clean the data over there. And then once the data is clean, simply move it to the target database. So generally, you go for this kind of two-step migration if you don't want to simply move from source to target, but you want to have an intermediate state somewhere where you might want to perform some kind of cleansing or data augmentation or feature engineering kind of thing. Okay. The second use case which I have seen is it is also used as an ETL process. And yeah, I mean, it sounds funny, but it can be used actually. So for instance, suppose you have got some kind of analytics solution where you are keeping your analytics data into S3 bucket, and you are cataloging it in the Glue. Probably you have created a lake formation, data lake behind it, and then you're querying it, using it, all good. In that case, actually, you can use database migration service to migrate data, either full, and then of course incremental, because both are supported. So you can configure your ETL process in such a way that first time you do the full migration, and then you configure your incremental migration. Then you run your incremental migration to move incremental data to this S3 bucket. So if you are trying to move your data or dump your data into your S3 bucket for analytics purpose, for any other purpose, then in that case you can use a data migration service, and data migration service can work as an ETL process in this case. Okay, so these are two typical use cases I have seen. I mean, if you have seen more use cases, feel free to write in my comment section, and then I'm happy to discuss about them. So when you're trying to configure S3 as destination, there are a few things which is good to know. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, simple, but few things good to know. So let's talk about those things. First of all, your format could be CSV or Parquet. So both of the formats, CSV and Parquet, are supported. So your relational data can be at destination stored as a CSV or Parquet. Second thing, when you're trying to do full load, it will create files with this kind of incremental hexadecimal counters. So you will have things like load 1, load 2, 9, A, B, C. So that kind of incremental file name DMS uses when you're trying to do the full load for your files, okay, for your tables. And then if you're trying to use incremental load, then your TCDC file, your change data files, they use timestamp. Yeah, so you should know these two things, that how the file names are generated. Yeah, just for the information. Then if your source table does not have a record, or if you have applied a filter criteria or something like that, which is not pulling all the records, something like that, then in that case, your file is not created. So it is not going to migrate your empty table. Simply take it that way. So it will migrate only when the table has some data. So it's not going to create a blank file for you because the source table was blank or there was no record into it. It will create a file for you in your S3 bucket only if there is data in your source table. Then there's certain way you structure the data. So for instance, suppose you in your configuration you provided this bucket as a location where you want to dump your data, where you want to put your data, and of course you can have a folder hierarchy under it if you want. But suppose this is a bucket you want to dump your data, then what it will do, it will generate the folder structure below it with the following scheme. So first, if you have got multiple, it will first create a folder for the database. So suppose in your source you have got multiple databases, multiple schemas, then it will create one folder per database, per schema. And then in each database or schema folder, it will create one folder per table. Yeah, and again, it will create table folder only when the table has some data, otherwise it's not going to create it. It will create one folder per table under the database, and then it will simply create files under that. And these files will take either this naming convention for full or this one for incremental. Yeah? So this is the kind of structure it creates when you're trying to migrate your data. So again, not that it's super important, but I think it's always good to know. So what we are going to build today, just to understand this whole thing, we are going to create an relational database service, RDS in Amazon, and then we will create an S3 bucket, and then we are going to configure a full data dump. Okay? As simple as that. So in order to implement this scenario, we have created a work exercise, and this exercise has been published to our website, aws-dojo.com. I'm going to talk you through the steps involved in the exercise, and post that you can run this exercise by your own to implement the scenario I just described. The exercise provides you step-by-step instructions to implement the scenario end-to-end. So let's jump on to the exercise. So here we go. It's aws-dojo.com where we've got this exercise, which simply uses data migration service to migrate data from a relational database to the S3 bucket. So these are the steps involved. The first step is that you need to have an AWS account, and if you don't have, you can use this link to create the account. The next step is to create the S3 bucket and IAM role. And this IAM role is used by data migration service to authorize call to, it gives the data migration service authorizations to call other AWS services. Okay, we log into AWS console, and then say we go to the IAM management console, click on the roles, create role. This is a role for DMS service, and then on the next tab, I'm giving it power user access. But again, as I mentioned in many other videos as well, I'm keeping in power user access because I want to keep it simple. But if you're going for production deployment, you want to give very specific permissions over here. Then you click on the next review button. You provide your role name called Dojo DMS role, and then simply create the role. The role has been created. Now we go to the S3 management console, and there we create this Dojo DMS bucket. And then under that bucket, we create a folder called data. So this is going to be the target location when we migrate the data. Okay, so my IAM role and the target bucket location both are ready. Now I need to launch the source database. But before I launch that, I need to create a security group which will give the firewall access to my relational database. So we go to the VPC management console, say I want to create a new security group, give this a nice name called Dojo DB security group, and all I'm saying is that it gives MySQL access from anywhere. Okay, Again, if you want, you can restrict it further by using the IP address, or probably using the security group or IP address of. I think you don't have access to IP address of a DMS server, but yeah, you can probably, or probably you can. I think because you can see the EC2 instance. So yeah, if you want, again, in a nutshell, if you want, you can restrict this access from the DMS server only. But in this case, I kept it off. Okay. But anyway, it's an intranet based. It's not going anywhere in the public. So this machine is running. The RDS instance is going to run safely inside the VPC. Next, we launch a MySQL RDS instance. So we go to the RDS management console. I want to create a database, standard create, Amazon Aurora. And since I try to keep my cost of my exercise low, I'm selecting Aurora for MySQL, and that too serverless, so that I incur the minimum cost. But of course, you can select any other choice if you wish to do so. Then you start providing the configuration detail and say, my instance is called DozoDB instance. This is my login name, admin. This is my password, and then you go further down and say, what is the capacity you need? Since it is serverless, I can provide a range of capacity, and I went for the lowest two possible. Okay, 1 and 2. And then I said my relational database service will run from the default VPC. Then I selected the default subnet group, which basically takes all three subnets together. And then for security group, I'm simply selecting the security group I selected earlier. Okay. And then I'm going to use query editor over here to create the data in the source database. So for that, I need to enable data API so that my query editor can use data API to talk to the Aurora database to create the data for me. And once I have selected data API, I can click on create database, and it will take some time before the database is available. And once it is, wait for the status to change to available. And once the database instance is available, you can make note of endpoint because we need it later when we are configuring the source endpoint in the data migration service. Now my database is ready. We need to create some data because ultimately we want to migrate some data. So we simply select, we simply click on the query editor on the left-hand side. It will ask me the login name and password for the DB Dojo instance. So I select this DojoDB instance cluster. I give my login name and password. I connect to database, and then I simply run this script over here. If you look at the script, I'm creating first a Dojo database, and then I'm creating this customers table, entering some sample data to customers, then creating an employees table, entering some sample data to employees. And that's it. So I'm creating two tables with certain records. And these two tables, customers and employees, are under Dojo database. So this data I create into the source. Now my source is ready. Now I can start configuring. So my source is ready, which is RDS. My destination is ready, which is S3 bucket. Now I can start configuration of the DMS. So for that, we go to DMS management console. And first we create a replication instance. It will ask me the replication instance name. I provide that one. Then I use the default, default instance class. I make sure that my VPC is the same VPC where my relational database has been created, because I want connectivity between my DMS server and my replication server and my RDS. So for that, I'm choosing the same subnet, same VPC where my RDS server is in this case. And then I make sure that I don't make it publicly accessible, so that I don't want my DMS to be available on the internet. And we simply create the replication instance, and we wait till the status of the replication instance changes to available. So it will create a replication instance. Now we'll create source and destination endpoint because we need to provide connection information for source and destination. So in the same DMS management console, we go to the endpoints and we say we want to create an endpoint. First, we select the source endpoint. And remember, our source is relational database, RDS instance. So we simply go here, say my endpoint identifier is Dojo source. Here is source engine is actually Aurora MySQL. I give the endpoint information, which I copied from the earlier task when I was creating the RDS instance. Provide port 3306, username, password, and now my source endpoint is ready. And it does provide an option to test your source endpoint, any endpoint, to check if the connectivity is working. So you can do that as well. But I'm not doing it here because actually, yeah, it's a very controlled exercise we are doing here. But it's always a good practice to test your endpoints for the connectivity. Now we go back to again into the endpoints. We want to, now my source endpoint is ready. I want to create the target endpoint. So we again create an endpoint, go for target endpoint, give it a nice name, Dojo target. This time my target is actually Amazon S3. So it will ask, okay, which role the data migration service will use to copy data. So I provide the name of the role which my data migration service will use to write data to the S3 bucket. So this role is going to authorize DMS. Then what is my bucket name? I give that. What is my bucket folder? And I give this. This is the path where the data will be created. So remember the structure I talked about? This is the path I'm going to provide. So bucket name and folder name. Under this folder, it will create my database or schema name folder. And under that, it will create one folder for each table. And then under those table name folders, it will simply dump my data files. Okay, so my environments are ready. My endpoints are ready. Now I can do the final task, which is create and run replication task. So for that, we go to database migration task. So we want to create the task. We give this a nice name called Dojo task. Which replication instance to use, and we simply select the replication instance we created. We selected source database endpoint as Dojo source, target database endpoint as Dojo target, and for the migration type, I'm saying simply migrate the existing data, nothing else. Okay, job done. Then you configure some of your task settings over here. Yeah, you can select your file size and those kind of things here, but most important thing here is that you have to apply the selection rule. So now you're reading from the source, but then which database, which tables you are interested in, you have to configure a selection rule for that. So for that, we go to this table mapping thing here and say I want to create a new role. This you can do in JSON editor also, by the way, because all this configuration actually gets converted into a JSON configuration. But if you're new, probably you want to use this wizard over here. So simply use the wizard and say, I want to create a new selection role. And it will ask, okay, do you want to enter the schema? Say, yeah, I want to enter schema. And my schema or is Dojo database, because this is a database where I want to bring data from. And what is table name? And I'm saying everything. So I'm using this wildcard over here, say every table on the Dojo database I'm interested in. And finally, it says action. So I say, well, include this table. So basically what I'm saying here is that include all table under this database. Okay. So this kind of multiple selection rules you can create to decide which data to bring in and which not. And now that your data has, now when you do that, you simply create the task, which will automatically start the execution as well. And you wait till the status of the task changes to load complete. Once the status changes to load complete, you know that your data has been migrated from the source database to the S3 bucket. So you go to the S3 bucket, Dojo DMS bucket data, and then if you see that under that you have got a folder called Dojo database created. If you go under the Dojo database, you can see your customers and employees folder created. And under those folders, you can see your CSV file has been created. And in fact, if you open the CSV file, you can see the data over there. But basically, you can see that under the both employees folder and under the other one, which is customers folder. Yeah, customers folder, you have got respective data in their own CSV file, and you can see that how it has uses the numeric system, numerical system to generate the file name. That pretty much finishes the exercise. The next step is to go and clean up the resources so that you don't incur any cost post the exercise. So that was all for the exercise, guys. If you like this, please click on the like button. Please subscribe to my channel for similar other videos and exercises and workshops. There are many other workshop and exercises similar to what I talked about now, which help you implement scenarios, and you learn about AWS services when you implement those scenarios. So please do explore that. If you have any feedback or comment, or if you have requests for any new content, you can always reach out to me through the comments in the YouTube channel, or you can also click on the contact us tab over here and can provide feedback. We always look forward to your feedback, and we try our best to act on them. Okay, so that's all for today, guys. Thank you very much. I promise to come back with another video in the coming days. Meanwhile, stay safe and have a nice day. Bye bye.